you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. There only season that makes it official. Welcome to 16 years, 24 episodes of the Chris Voss Show. And we've been bringing you the most brightest people, the smartest minds, the people who share their journeys, the cathartic moments, their lessons of life, their blueprints on how they overcame their cathartic moments and trials and tribulations and all that sort of good stuff to make your life better and improve the quality of it. We were going to do a show that made everyone's lives worse, but I don't know, it didn't sound like it was any fun. So we made a show that makes everyone's life better. So be sure to share this show with your friends, neighbors, relatives. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the TikTokity, and all those crazy places on the internet. Opinions expressed by guests on the podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the Chris Voss Show. Some guests of the show may be advertising on the podcast, but it is not an endorsement or review of any kind. Today's featured author comes to us from bookstolifemarketing.co.uk. With expert publishing to strategic marketing, they help authors reach their audience and maximize their book's success. Today, an amazing young man on the show. We're going to be talking about his book. It is called Tradition to Truth, One Man's Search for Honest Answers, out April 13th, 2017. Jerry Mitchell is going to be joining us on the show, talking about his book, his insights, his stories of life, and improve the quality of yours. Or, you know, if he doesn't, then you can just ask for your money back. Oh, wait, the show's free. See what we did there. Anyway, Jerry grew up on a farm working with large animals for most of his life, and it gave him a great deal of insight into the blueprint his creator used to design the world and mankind. When he began asking questions that no pastor or rabbi could answer without twisting the Bible out of context, he began to read everything he could about where some of the traditions first originated. He soon discovered that the answers are already in the Bible, and if they're willing to put the traditions and man-made doctrines aside and actually read what is written. The result is in the books. What has taken years of research and forensic analysis of the Bible may answer some of the questions and raise even more for folks. Welcome to the show, Jerry. How are you?
I am well. Thank you very much. It's good.
It's good to have you. Give us your .coms. Where do you want people to get to know you better on the interwebs?
The best place is for people who want to find out what I'm about is GiveGuide90. That's GiveGuide90.com. If they're just interested in the books, it's authorjerrymitchell.com.
Okay. authorjerrymitchell.com. So give us a 30,000 overview in your words of what's inside this book.
Basically, it is almost a side-by-side comparison that looks at the differences between our modern Christian and some Jewish traditions and what's really in the Bible.
Ah. And there's a I guess there's a lot of traditions, I guess.
Oh, there's a lot of traditions. You know, think about how you fit 3 days and 3 nights between Good Friday afternoon and Easter Sunday morning.
There's people that do that, and
they try.
Yeah, there's Lent, and what else is there? There's like Lent people do, and there's also traditions of. We're big on traditions, these human beings.
Yes, we are.
So you explore this and vet it in your book, Tradition to Truth, and tell us about your journey. What let's talk about your upbringing. What led you on this journey to search for these honest answers?
I was always that weird kid who asked questions and wasn't afraid to ask questions.
Sounds like me as a child. That's why I'm laughing.
I remember sitting in Sunday school coloring a picture, and it was two angels, and of course they had wings. And I looked up at the Sunday school teacher, who happened to be my mother, and I said, "Do all angels have wings?" And she looked at me and said, "Well, of course they do. Everybody knows that."
Oh,
so time goes on, and I learned. I was like 5 or 6 years old at that point, but time goes on, and I learned a little bit more, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. How do you get 3 days and 3 nights between Good Friday and Sunday morning? And Einstein can't do it, right? There's just no way.
Yeah.
So nobody could give me these answers. As I'm growing and learning and actually understanding how to think for myself, I'm looking at folks and I'm thinking, why are you doing this if you don't understand what you're doing?
Yeah.
So I just kind of did what everybody does. I kind of let it fall into the background for a little while. But when I really got serious about it and started looking at these things, it was like, hang on, I've been doing this stuff all my life. And it actually, some of the things we do actually conflict with what's in the Bible. Why would we want to do that?
Yeah.
So, that's kind of how I came about. I was just dumb enough to keep asking questions.
Well, I mean, that's how we learn. That's how we learn stuff, right? That's how we master things. We ask questions and go, what's going on here, eh? I was that way in growing up in religion, where I was constantly asking the questions, and they'd just say, "Shut up! You just have to have faith." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it sounds like a good idea there, buddy, but it doesn't work for me. I need these questions answered." And there were a lot of conflicts I would see in religion, where stuff didn't make sense, and I'm like, I just needed to make. I guess I had logic or something as a young person, but I was a pretty dumb kid, I always thought. But anyway, that's another story. But so, when did you start sitting down and start really writing and pondering this and setting this up for a book?
Well, I worked with primarily large animal reproduction most of my life. And when my parents were beginning to fail, we moved back to the town I grew up in. And fortunately had enough time to be able to really sit down and start doing the research, start looking at things, and I wasn't satisfied with what a lot of people are. They'll watch, the YouTube videos and think, well, that's got to be the answer. I was more in depth. A lot of people, when they look at the Bible, they will study it philosophically, and that's great. That's great. I take a more mechanical approach, or what I call forensic approach. And I think that comes from all the years I spent, when you're working with animals, you're working on a farm, working in agriculture, you learn how to work on things, right?
Yeah.
If I could take it apart and put it back together, I had it made. And I thought, well, if I can take the Bible apart and put it back together in a way that makes sense, and I can find out where all the parts are, then I should be able to come up with something that actually works. Because, let's face it, the Bible's full of prophecy, but it's not in chronological order.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to dig through the language, the culture, and the history to figure out what is being spoken about or what's being written about and when it's being written. So, I say, it's kind of like a forensic scientist who goes to a crime scene and they're looking for clues. Well, you can do the same thing with literature, and you can especially do it with the Bible. It is, I can't remember who said it, but they said it was the greatest hyperlinked book in all of history. And it really is. Because there's, if you have a cross-reference, it'll give you a few cross-references. But if you dig into the original language and the original writings, the cross-references go much, much farther.
I bet. Has anyone ever taken the Bible and done, how they do in like some books, they do like a lot of notes and cross references and the details you find them like on the bottom of the page. Has anyone ever done that?
Oh yeah, a lot of people have done it. The unfortunate thing is they try to force our traditions into what's there, or they'll take a point of view from a certain Christian denomination, and they'll try to make it fit, and it doesn't always fit. If we simply, my wife likes to say, just read the words that are there. Most of the time, even in English, it works, depending on the translation you're reading. But if you just read what's written, and you take off the filter of tradition, you take off the filter of denominational doctrine, you get a much, much, much different picture of what's actually there than what we see in the movies, what we might hear from the pulpits on Sunday mornings.
We want people to read the book and buy it. So I like to just tease out stuff. So if we're going too far, let me know. But did you find that a lot of the traditions that we think are in the Bible, or we do the tradition a certain way because we think it's what the Bible is applicable to? Do you find that a lot of them are kind of incorrect? Yeah, I do.
Wow. When we think about and I'll go back to Good Friday for now.
Okay.
But if we look at that, one of the things Jesus said is the only sign you get is a sign of the prophet Jonah. Just as the prophet Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man must be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights.
Yeah.
So
that was after he's crucified, right? Jesus?
No, that was before he was crucified.
Oh, I was
when he said that
3 days was about the thing. Well, this explains some things.
But he said that before he was crucified so that the people would know 3 days and 3 nights.
Oh, okay.
So you start looking and you think, I know the answer's here. Where am I going to find it? And where I found the answer was in one of the craziest places, because people use Daniel for end time prophecy. They think everything that the angel Gabriel told Daniel is all about, eschatological end time stuff. And it's not. One of the things that Gabriel told Daniel was that, there would be an event that would cause the sacrifices and the oblations to cease. Well, there's only one event in history actually 2, but only one event in history caused by one person. And that was the death on the cross. Now, you could argue that when, the Romans destroyed the temple in around 68 or 70 AD, that also, put an end to it. But the need for it, because what Gabriel was talking about is it was going to be one person who was responsible for putting the sacrifices and the oblations, they wouldn't be needed anymore. And then he says something interesting. He says that in the midst of the week, the Messiah would be cut off, but not for himself. And I read that and I looked at it and I thought, wait a minute. In the middle of the week, what's the middle of the week? It's a Wednesday. So if you put the crucifixion on a Wednesday afternoon, then you can count 3 days and 3 nights from Wednesday afternoon until late Saturday afternoon. And that actually fits with John's narrative that we get early on the first day is when Mary went to the tomb. Well, a first century Hebrew writer writing to Hebrew people, when he says early on the first day, the days begin on the Hebrew calendar at sundown, not at midnight. So early on the first day would be just after dark on what we consider today Saturday night. Makes absolute sense when you put it in context of who's writing, who's reading, and the culture they live in.
Wow. Finding out, yeah. So was the Bible put out of context or out of order when dates and times and stuff like that?
Some of it was, yes, and some of it was for a reason. The bigger problem is after the original writers, well, let me back up for a second. The Old Testament, what we consider the Old Testament, was actually put in the Hebrew order by Nehemiah and Ezra. When the Council of Nicaea met, they rearranged the Old Testament order. So that kind of gives us some chronological problems there.
Yeah.
But the bigger problem was with the New Testament, not when the original writers wrote it, but after that. It has been added to as late as the 12th century that we know of. So some of what we're reading, not all of what we're reading, but some of what we're reading was actually added later. We know, for instance, Paul says women should be quiet in church. That's not attributed to Paul when you read the critical texts. We know from the notes on the manuscripts, it was added as late as the 5th century.
Oh, really?
Paul never wrote those words. And that brings up an interesting question that I get when I say this. People say, well, can we trust the Bible? And I say, yes, we can. Absolutely. When we are able to verify that the person that, is attributed as writing something actually wrote it.
And how do we do that? Because, it was written a bit ago, a couple years ago.
There are a lot of scholars out there who do nothing but study the ancient texts, the oldest ones that we can find. And thankfully, they have a compilation of those. However, it is the most boring reading you will ever do. In fact, I have a copy of the Nestle Allen, which is the standard, and it actually comes with a book to tell you how to read it.
So comes with a book for the book.
Yes.
That's what I should do. That's a great way to sell 2 books at the same time, right? Yeah.
Well, kind of, but there's so much information there that you have to be able to know where to go and look at what.
Wow. That's getting complex. And then you still have to have the Bible. So you got 3 books you have to buy. This is like an Amazon deal right now. So why did you decide to, I'm trying to set up a joke here, but so you really don't like traditions. Now, how is Walmart going to move product without these traditions and mattress companies? They need those 3-day sales.
Well, yeah, and they need Christmas, and they need other things, Halloween, Thanksgiving, right? Some traditions aren't terrible. We think about Thanksgiving.
Depends on your family, actually.
Well, that's true too. Thanksgiving has evolved, right? When I was young, Mom would start cooking either the night before or the morning of. The family would come over. There really wasn't the football games that there was later on. And there's certainly, the stores were closed. But in the last few years, what have we seen? It's all about football. It's all about shopping. There's very, very little family left in Thanksgiving. And very little thanks left in Thanksgiving as well.
Yeah. And people are pretty, it just seems like everything's really commercial now with commercials and
it is,
money making and money changers. And, it's not, you don't really celebrate, Thanksgiving anymore. You just fight with Uncle Doug over politics and then you eat some turkey and pass out or something.
Pretty much. And, there's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy. But at the same time, we have to be aware of how we spend our money and how we make it. And, we just need to be a little better people.
Yeah. Well, you want us to be better people too? What kind of rigmarole are you trying to run here, man? Jeez, what do you want from us?
And, a lot of times we hear, oh, I'm only human. Well, let's go back to Genesis on that, because we might be only human, but we are made in the image of our Creator.
Well, he must have been really good looking because I am.
Now, I've always said I have a face for radio.
So do I. Have a face for radio and a voice for print. One of the two.
Yep.
Actually, I have a pretty good voice. It's the one thing they gave me. They're like, make him ugly as hell, but give him a good voice so he can do a podcast. He can survive on that. Well, you got to get something from the Angles. So you take on these traditions. Do you think that we should change these traditions? Do we need to look at some of them and be like, hey, we need to make this a 1-day thing instead of a 3-day thing? And, Walmart's just going to have to deal with selling mattresses in 1 day instead of 3.
Well, yeah, there are some traditions that are harmless. I've, as you can imagine, I've spoken in a lot of churches, been to a lot of churches, and a lot of churches, when they take up their offering, they will stand and sing the doxology. There's nothing wrong with that. But I've also been there when, the pastor's been running a little late. So he says, we're not going to sing the doxology today. And when they don't do it, everybody looks around like, is the roof going to fall in?
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But when we have a tradition or a doctrine that absolutely conflicts with the Bible, we might want to examine that and say, we might want to change some of the things we're doing.
Yeah. Because, if it doesn't make any sense, that might help people with faith, right? Because people that ask questions like you and I, when they're young, they might, they might want to know better as to what's going on there, right?
Oh, absolutely. I know a lot of people who have sat on a church pew for all their lives, and they know their Bible, and they hear some things coming out of the pulpit that might not go along with that, and they think to themselves, well, this pastor, he's been to seminary, he's been to Bible college, he's got all these degrees, he must be smarter than I am. What am I missing? And sometimes it's not what they're missing. They might be the ones who are correct in the situation, but the pastor, instead of preaching Bible, is now preaching denominational doctrine or legend or tradition. My wife's father, when he was alive, was a Southern Baptist pastor. And one of the conversations we had once, he said, well, it's not really in the Bible, but we believe.
Oh.
And wait a minute. Why would you profess to preach the Bible? Why, if something's not there, would you believe it? It stopped making sense to me right there.
Yeah. You're like, what is this? Yeah. That would definitely do it, though.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people like that. There's a huge number of people like that.
So what has your relationship been with religion? Do you I know you mentioned, I'll pull this joke again. I'll round it about. I know you mentioned you work with large animal breeding, I think is what you said. Reproduction is what you said.
Yes.
That's what my girlfriends call it when I want some bedroom fun. I'm a very large guy, eating wise. Anyway, so I imagine that wasn't that kind of stuff. What was it? And have you been pondering this for a long time? You've been following this. You've been, tell us, what kind of led up to the book and finally made you have that aha moment that went, I'm going to write this down.
Well, actually, I blame my wife for me writing the book.
That's good.
Because she made the comment, you know all these things now. What are you going to do with it? I'm like, I don't know. She's like, well, why don't you write a book? Me, my poor English teachers would be, spinning in their grave, if they knew I'd written a book. But when I was doing my research, when I was looking, when I was doing all the reading I could, and unfortunately, the library where I lived at that time had a very poor religious research section. So I was having them order all of these offhand books that I could read, and they're like, "What are you doing?" But I would, I'd spend hours, sleepless nights reading through this stuff and trying to figure out what went together. And, I'd read something and I'm like, that can't be right. So I'd go to the computer and I'd search these things out. And of course, you can believe everything you see on the internet, right?
Yeah.
Well, when you start looking at religious things on the internet, you get bombarded by every point of view there is out there.
Oh, yeah.
So then, that starts a whole new trigger, because now you've got to figure out what's right, what's wrong, where did this come from, why is it like this? And there's, quite a few traditions out there that have various ways of telling the story, but they all come down to kind of the same point. If you look at Genesis 11 and the story of the Tower of Babel, we read about Nimrod and how terrible a person he was. And, one of the compilation of the traditions is that, Nimrod was treated like a god. Well, his son, Tammuz, was also treated like a god, but apparently, and you'll get a kick out of this, he was killed by a wild boar when he was 40 years old. So, okay, that's how we get Lent, and that's why we eat ham on Easter Sunday.
That explains everything. I like ham. Ham's good. Good stuff there.
But, all of these traditions that we have, they had to start from somewhere. Right? Nobody wakes up one day and says, "You know what? I'm just going to start eating ham on Easter Sunday morning." It has to come from somewhere. Yeah. So, why not follow the legends and follow the traditions back to where we think it came from? Yeah.
I like the idea and concept behind it, because, the more we can attach, like the Mormon Church has a real problem where they have trouble with the, what is it? They have trouble with the data and the facts and stuff, because there's a lot that doesn't match up. And so a lot of people leave the religion because they're like, I don't know how this works, and yada, yada, yada. So, it's kind of interesting how the whole thing operates.
When Traditions of Truth came out, I started getting questions. And one of the main topic of questions was marriage and divorce. Because, unfortunately, the modern Christian church, they don't always see things the way people see things. And there are certain denominations out there who say, divorce is bad no matter what. Well, if divorce is so bad, why are there provisions given in the Bible for it? And one of the foundations of some denominations' doctrine is, well, Jesus said the only reason for divorce is adultery. Well, when I looked at that, I'm like, wait a minute, there's no way he could have said that. It would have been impossible. And I say that going back to Leviticus and Deuteronomy. The punishment for adultery was not divorce. The punishment for adultery was death.
Ooh, that's rough.
So if the problem in the marriage was adultery, there's no need for divorce, because you can't divorce a dead person.
That's true. You get stoned. I guess you get stoned to death. Is that what happened? Is that what they do?
Both people.
Well, that would really ruin AshleyMadison.com, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it, though?
They wouldn't have any users left, I think. I don't know how that works. So very interesting. Very interesting. So what does the future hold? Do you have any more books coming out that extends this run, or what's the future hold for you?
I've actually written 2 more. God's Universe, God's Universe, God's Rules. It goes into a little more depth and detail. Tradition to Truth is pretty basic, introductory.
Okay,
it's for the average person who says, what's going on, and God's Universe, God's Rules. That one gets a little more in detail, a little more in depth, and then my 3rd book is Inheriting Lies. And the reason I wrote Inheriting Lies was because people had a lot of questions. And they're like, we want detailed answers. So I gave them detailed answers. And when I finished it, I thought, you know what? This book needs to be on the desk of every seminary student, every Bible college student around the world. Because these are the questions they're going to have to answer.
Yeah. Most definitely. So when do these books launch? Are they on Amazon yet at pre-sale, or what's the plan?
They are on Amazon. They were republished last fall.
Okay.
So they are available.
Okay. So people can order them up now and dig into them. And would you say they're kind of like a continuation, like they're part of a series of these books?
Not really.
Okay.
Because they look at different points of view. Tradition and Truth being very introductory, answers a few questions. God's Universe, God's Rules deals more with biblical authority. Do we hold our ideas up to the Bible, or do we hold the Bible up to our ideas? That kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
And I do spend some time with creation and evolution in that one as well, and look at it. And of course, here's a little rabbit trail for you. Me being involved with large animal reproduction most of my life, reproduction basically denies evolution, because evolution says, we crawled out of the primordial swamp, right? Well, okay, that's
for me.
great.
It was the back of a Denny's.
Yeah.
No, I just had to do that joke.
Well, that's great for
Denny's.
one particular species, or one thing of one species, but reproduction says you've got to have 2 at the same time.
Yeah.
It doesn't do you any good to have a male rabbit born, a million years before a female rabbit, because there's no reproduction at that point.
Yeah, it's pretty lonely. A lot of Playboy magazine at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, reproduction basically denies evolution in itself.
Yeah. But I can just see the animal. He's like sitting there going, any millennial now, the female should come along, eh? Yeah.
Right. And then of course, Inheriting Lies, I look at the Trinity, I look at all kinds of things, answer the question, is Jesus the Messiah? For the answer to that, you have to buy the book, though.
Yeah, gotta buy the book, folks. I love the roundabout. You brought a full circle and brought the plug right in there. So on your website, do you do any consulting, any advising, any coaching right now? Any plans in the future?
Not on the website. I do when people contact me directly, I will answer their questions and I will give them a little bit of guidance. I don't claim to be, a pastor. I don't claim to be a counselor. I don't claim to be anything other than a Bible teacher who can hopefully help you, live a better life. And as I like to say, live the way that our Creator designed us to live.
There you go. Well, anything more we need to know, Jerry, as we go out?
Not that I'm aware of. I think you have pretty much covered it.
Yeah, pretty good. And you got 3 books out there, so people can order them all, check them out. Are they like the other book where you got to have one of the books to read the other 2?
Not really, no.
There you go. I thought that was so interesting that there's a book on how to read another book. That's funny.
There is.
Yeah, it's wild. Well, thank you very much, Jerry, for coming to the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it as well.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey as well. Folks, order up the book so you can find out all the secrets we didn't talk about. Tradition to Truth, One Man's Search for Honest Answers, and out April 13th, 2017. I'm not sure Amazon's going to appreciate not having more sales days if we change things, but that's their problem. I mean, Jeff Bezos just got married. He's got more problems coming than he knows. Anyway, guys.
That's for sure.
Thanks so much for tuning. The jokes on today's show. Don't write me, folks. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com / Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com / Chris Voss. Chris Voss on the TikTok and all those crazy places on the internet. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time. And that should have us out.